Hello and welcome to the Webflail podcast, the podcast where we interview successful Webflowers about their 3 biggest failures as creative entrepreneurs. Now, obviously, this is the video recording of the podcast, but if you want just the audio, head to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts to listen to the edited version there. Also, I send out a banging newsletter every week called the Webflail Roundup to help you to become a more successful Webflower. So I send you the recording of the podcast, I send you 3 Webflow jobs, and I also send you an article and inspirational websites. So why not go sign up? Just check the link down there or go to webflail.com. Now, let's get into the episode. Hello, and welcome to episode 23 of Webflail, the podcast dedicated to uncovering the greatest failures behind the greatest Webflowers, because success often comes after learning from many failures. I'm your host, Jack, a failure connoisseur, and today my guest is Penny Olorenshaw. She's the chief builder for Build Marketing and co-founder of No Code North. She's a Canadian Webflow MVP, having helped to set up various events. But before this, though, Penny spent 18 years in Canada's dance community, working as a stage and production manager with some of Canada's finest ballet and modern dance companies and schools. We'll dig into this during the episode. Penny, welcome to the Webflow podcast.
Thank you, Jack. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, same. I mean, I've been digging into your fascinating career, and as everyone just heard in the intro there, you spent 18 years in dance management, but can you just give us a rundown of how you transitioned from that into marketing and finding Webflow?
Right. Well, I was always, as a kid, I always kind of liked laying things out and organizing things and getting things to line up. So I was always sort of in the back of my mind, should I go to design school? But I can't design. That's not my strength, right? And perhaps I should have gone to design school, but I was just a little afraid that I just wouldn't do very well, that I might just fail at that. But leaving the dance world was sort of about just trying to find a new direction. I didn't feel like I wanted to go further or that there were, the kinds of jobs that were available. I'd already been doing that dream job that I'd had for a long time. So I didn't really want to move up into a bigger company or into a more advanced job. I just didn't feel that that was really where my strengths lay. And I decided I had left once before and then actually just freelanced as a stage manager for a number of years and then went back to the company that I was at for most of that 18 years. And but the second time I decided, it was like, no, I need to make a change. I want to be able to travel where I choose. I saw amazing places, but I got to see so little of them because I was working all the time when I was in these great places. I got to meet great people, but I didn't have that sort of self-propelled, choice as to where to go. And so I thought, I'd like to have a different kind of experience with traveling. Um, and I've had some, not as much as I'd hoped, but there's still time. And I ended up going into working for an audiovisual company in the administration side, but it was still working with technicians, with people that put on shows. I even stage managed a couple of shows with the audiovisual guys. But I was working in the office and assisting the president, and it wasn't my strength, first of all, and I didn't much love it. And we wanted to move out of the city into the country, and finally, I was like, well, what am I going to do if we move out to the country? I don't want to just go get another job. And so I discovered through that job, I had a chance to work with Photoshop and Illustrator and whatnot, and thought, I like this. And this is kind of back to that, laying things out and making boxes fit together. And I found a course and decided that this is what I was going to do. And we covered HTML. We learned how to build websites and tables. And this was a long time ago. And so we moved out to the country, and I thought, okay, I'm going to start a business, but I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to spend a long time learning how to build websites really on my own more than anything. Um, what
Mm.
bits I could find online. This was 17 years ago. So, and the things that I could find online, the books that I could buy. I have a lot of books. I haven't read most of them, but I do have them. A lot of reference material, and slowly sort of connected with people out here. Joined groups, met people, found clients, and you know sort of trundled along for a long time. And then Webflow showed up. I had joined an agency sort of group. People. It was like a fellow who ran courses for people that wanted to expand their agencies and build. And one of the people in there, a lot of the people actually worked with Adobe Business Catalyst, which was this sort of full-on, anything you need to do, we have the bits and pieces to do it. And Adobe was shutting it down all of a sudden in the midst of everybody having built their whole careers on it. And so people started going out try to find other options. And one of the ones that came up was Webflow. And it still took me a couple of years because I wasn't working in Business Catalyst, so that wasn't my issue. But I finally started working with it about nearly 4 years ago, and have liked working with it much more so than going back to hand coding and whatnot. So that's kind of the process.
Wow, that's an amazing journey towards Webflow. And coming from dance, I mean,
Hmm.
one might think, oh, that's completely different skill set. But I actually read on your website, and I absolutely love this quote. You said, just like a performance, a successful project comes out of a solid, repeatable process which is flexible enough to adapt to current conditions.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I guess what you're saying from that is that all your experience organizing, managing, that certainly plays a huge part as to, ensuring your client's success, I guess.
Well, it does, but it's also that flexibility to understand that every client and every job is different, right? One of the reasons that I put that in there is that when you're in theater, and because I worked in dance, we did a lot of traveling, right? And so we'd go into a theater at 8 o'clock in the morning. We would know in advance, roughly what we were dealing with. There'd been a lighting plan would have been sent in advance, and we knew how big the stage was and things like that. But there's always things you don't know, and you don't know about the people you're going to be working with. How skilled are they? Have they ever dealt with your type of equipment, or or dance, or how much you're going to have to clean the floor before you can even roll out your dance floor, um, because they took down a theater show the night before and there's nails all over the place, right? And
Mm.
so you go in at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon or thereabouts, you've got dancers on stage doing warm up. You have rehearsals all afternoon. You have to have dealt with all your lighting and sound stuff in the morning. And then at 8 o'clock at night, you turn yourself on and you run the show. And then you put it all back in the truck and move on to the next space. And so you learn to make choices and decisions based on what's in front of me today, right?
Mm.
Do we have to cut half the dancers out of the piece because there's too many dancers for the size of the stage? I've been in situations like that where it's like, okay, you go just stay off for a while, come on when this part happens. And you know but sometimes those troublesome situations turned into the best performances, the same way as sometimes a difficult project turns into your best final product. um,
Yeah.
that can
So I
happen.
guess what you're saying is like you're working out, what the process is to actually, ensure success. But then you've also, you know, as much as you might have a plan, that plan might have to
Mhm.
be adjusted depending on, what nails are in the floor of the client's project, as it were, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and being flexible to know that you've got a structure that you have to work, to make sure that everything gets done, but that it may have to flex a little bit
Yeah,
to get
definitely.
there.
And tell me about No Code North then. Like, what was
Mhm.
the inspiration behind starting that, and how did that come into your life?
Well, so you know that a lot of us are on FinSuite streams a lot, right?
Mm.
And actually, it's funny because before Reimar got into Webflow, I had actually followed him for a while and
Ah.
was getting his emails. This was like years and years ago, right? He wrote this big um, podcast or not big blog post that blew up, right? And I came across it at some point and went, wow, this guy's really interesting. Started following him. And then I kind of let it go. And then when I got into Webflow, and then all of a sudden here was this guy, and I'm going, he's got such a recognizable name. It's like, of course, that's got to be the same guy, right? And so he went to FinSuite, and they started doing the FinSuite streams. And at one point, they were talking about building communities, right? And that's a big thing for Weimar. And one of the fellows on in the chat who knew I was Canadian, and I wasn't certain whether he was. I think at some point we had figured out just through chatting. And he sent me a Slack message and said, "Should we start our own group here in Canada?" I was like, "Well, possibly." We found Maggie, and she was all into it, and so the three of us, sort of put it together as a way to focus a little more attention on the Canadians. There's some amazing Canadian designers and developers. We don't even know them, right? They've been working with Webflow for years, and I go digging through the experts, and it's like, oh, that company's that agency, but nobody knows about them in the bigger world. But we've had some stars like Grace Walker and Joe Moore. And then we have our no-code people like Aaron Kornblit and Connor Finlayson, right? So being able to kind of promote that, and also just to connect. We're a very big country with a very small population that is stretched in this little tiny line across the country, right? And so to help people connect, right? That was a big element of it, was so that we'd know who was working in that, and to help promote it all.
And if there was someone who might be listening from whichever part of the world that didn't necessarily have a kind of in-person Webflow community, I mean, what advice would you give them? Say they were like, I want to just meet other Webflowers in my local area. How do I even go about doing that? What would you recommend?
Well, there's a number of things. Get on a stream, right? Watch a stream, say hi in the chat, say where you're from. If somebody else is from the same area or nearby, perhaps you can connect, right? Pay attention to who's out there. Look at, the Webflow pages for, experts or whatever, and see if there's somebody in your region. Get on Twitter. Follow the people, you'll find people. Start, teach somebody else that how to work with Webflow, and then get together and talk about it, right? There's ways. And Webflow's going to grow, right? It's still in its infancy in terms of its reach into the web design community, but it's growing constantly. So even if there isn't somebody now, there may be down the road.
Yeah, I second that advice as well. Like, start very small, not necessarily, I want to create a community. It could just be like, just meet another person and, share thoughts on freelancing, or just get to know them. And then I think kind of naturally this nexus of like-minded people can kind of gravitate towards you. So, and then a community might form. But yeah,
and I think joining other communities, other existing communities, even if it's not in your area, right? So through live streams or whatever, getting comfortable with interacting with people, right? Especially, we can tend to be, especially for freelancers, we tend to be a little, quiet, and we're at home doing our little thing, right? And reaching out and interacting with networking may not be everybody's comfort level. And certainly I have found that being more active in areas like that made it possible for me to do something like No Code North, because 3-4 years ago I can't even imagine doing something like this group.
Hey guys, just a quick one to say that I write the Webflail newsletter every week, and it's meant for you to become a more successful freelancer. Check it out at webflail.com, or just look in the link just down there and sign up. Why not? It's free. It's going to be really helpful. Check it out. Back to the episode. So let's now go into your 3 failures that you kindly sent me.
Mhm.
Tell me about failure number 1, forgetting you had ADHD for nearly 10 years.
Okay, well, one of the things about having ADHD is uh, it's about the executive functions, right? That your executive functions like planning, organizing, um, uh, managing your time, and are affected. And one of the other things that it affects is working memory. So seeing something, being able to hold on to it in your mind, doing something else. I have this amazing ability to kind of be like, okay, I got to do this. I have to do this. And it's at this time. I have to do this. And I have to do this. And 30 seconds before time comes and I'm supposed to do that thing, I'm gone. My brain goes somewhere else. And it's like that thing never existed. And about 20 minutes later, I go, oh, shoot, I was supposed to do that. It's quite uncanny at times. Um, but so that sort of memory, you get used to being you, right? And what the diagnosis that I had was sort of a likely to have. So I don't have a full on diagnosis of ADHD done by um, a clinic or a blah blah blah. It was done by a psychotherapist who, after many years of therapy, said, I think we should do this test. I think this might be an answer for you. Because I'd been going to therapy for years trying to figure out why I just didn't seem to be getting ahead, why I had low self-esteem, why I had all sorts of things that I just didn't feel like I was going forward. And at this point, when I saw this woman, I was already living in the country, working on my own, trying to run a business, and not feeling like I was getting anywhere and having a hard time focusing and concentrating. And so she did this test, and it was like, okay, great. But that was sort of late 2000s, 2007, 8, somewhere in there. And there wasn't as much help as there is now. There wasn't as much talk about it. There weren't as many books about it. And so the book I chose probably wasn't the most helpful one in terms of guiding me towards something. I stopped seeing that therapist because she was back in the city and it was difficult to get there. And I just kind of went on doing what I was doing and forgot that perhaps part of the reason that I struggled was this problem where my brain doesn't work in all the same ways as somebody who doesn't have ADHD. And so I kind of forgot about it. And it meant that I struggled for a long time before someone I was in that group I had mentioned earlier, somebody had posted on Facebook in this Facebook group that he'd just been diagnosed with ADHD. And he said, now I understand why this, and this have been problems for me. And I'm like going, oh, those are all the things I'm struggling with. Those are all the things I've been struggling with all these years. And it's like, oh, I hadn't quite put all of it together those were that ADHD was the reason I was struggling, not that I was a bad person or had character flaws or that, you know, I was incapable of things. And at that point it was like, okay, now I need to start reading the real books, the proper ones that will help me. And I've tried medication a couple of times, but I react. I have side effects that are just not pleasant. So I just well, okay, no, now I'm not medicated, which means I struggle a little harder. I use caffeine and chocolate. Yeah, yeah. So
Sorry, you kind of cut
um,
out for a tiny bit there,
I know.
Penny.
Yeah, I do. I mentioned how is it now?
Yeah,
Is
no,
it
it's
okay
working
now?
now.
Okay, good. I
Yeah,
mentioned I live in the country, so sometimes my internet is a little bit dicey. So hopefully you can edit where you need to. So the
yeah, no,
things
that's
about
absolutely.
yeah. So the thing about ADHD is that it it just means your brain works a little differently. You make different connections, but it also means that it takes a lot more stimulation, right? The chemicals in your you just need more of the chemicals in your brain that push you, to motivate you to do things, to, stop procrastinating. We all procrastinate, right? Everybody, none of this is sort of unnatural human activity. It's, we all forget things. We all lose our keys from time to time. We all um, uh, put things off. It's like those are all natural. The things that because that's just human, right? To kind of like inertia, hard to get off the couch and go and do things. But it just takes that much more when when the motivators aren't the same as other people, right? It just takes that much more dopamine in your brain to get you to take the next step, to move forward. And so you start to question your abilities. You start to question that it's something wrong with you, as opposed to something that works differently in your brain. But at the same time, it's like I could do all sorts of things that somebody without ADHD can't do. I can handle a 16-hour workday if I have to, day after day after day. That was the thing about working in theater, was that, I know people who, who don't like, not having a strict 9 to 5 schedule, and therefore that kind of work just wouldn't work for them. For me, the stimulation of being out on the road, having a different theater to deal with, having new people to interact with every day, that was fun, right? And having that, pressure of the show starting at 8 o'clock and we have to be ready to go. Those were the things that stimulated my brain. Um, and actually, that was why working in dance was really good for me. There are lots of great stage managers who don't have ADHD, and in fact, working in theater, right, following a script, and all of that can be really difficult for somebody with ADHD, right? But with dance, it's like you've got the music, you've got the movement, you've got things that you're and there's a lot more lighting cues and sound cues that happen in a dance piece than often happen in a lot of theater pieces where it's just two people talking on a stage, right? And so those things were all really stimulating, and means you stay focused and you're there with it, and it's exciting, right?
Mm.
um, Day to day working in the office in between tours, that was a little harder, because then it was like, well, I'm partly my own boss, kind of like now as a freelancer. And that's where it kind of comes back to, being a freelancer. A person with ADHD as a freelancer has a tough time because they don't have the structure, and they don't necessarily have that accountability. You have accountability to the client to get that work done. But in terms of building your own business, moving forward, doing those things that you need to do, posting on social media, telling, networking, all of those things are a lot harder because there isn't anybody telling you you need to do this by 5 o'clock.
Mm.
It's easy to kind of go, I'll get to that tomorrow. Or it's easy to be busy all day cleaning your inbox and feeling like you've done something, but really you've done nothing to
Mm.
move the business forward. And so you start to question your capabilities, or all of that. And that often leads to low self-esteem, which is something a lot of ADHD people struggle with as well.
Mm. And it sounds like from what you're saying that you are giving advice to, if someone has ADHD that's listening,
Hmm.
don't beat yourself up.
Hmm.
You have, you know, yes, there are things that you struggle more with, but there's also huge advantages
Hmm.
in some respects, in some scenarios in life with ADHD. But would you recommend to someone who has ADHD, who's a Webflow freelancer, for example, to kind of try and implement some kind of structure so that they can get tasks done? Or are you saying, you know what, actually, you just need to let your body work however you want it to work, and just you'll make it happen if a client has a deadline?
Well, I can tell you that doesn't always happen. So what I would say is, if somebody isn't sure, right, there's a test. I'll give you a link to it that you can put in the show notes. That is, it's not a definitive. It's the test that my therapist gave to me. Um, and it's basically a series of questions, and you sort of, are answering how often something is a problem. And all it suggests is, if you answer a certain number of these things that, happen more often for you, then it's possible you may have. But there's all sorts of other things that could be going on, right? Maybe you've got dyslexia. Maybe there's, a number of different things. Maybe it's just anxiety, but there's a lot of things that kind of come along with ADHD. So sometimes there's more than one element in there. And it's like, so take that information and go and try to find somebody who can give you a full diagnosis. And that's the one thing that I wish I'd had. And I still could. I just have to find the dollars for it, because that's not something our healthcare system provides for free. Um, is to go through a whole process. The younger you are, the easier. I mean, it's hard, but the younger you are, the more people you have that you can, that the therapist can refer to, right? Asking your parents how, certain things you did as a child, or looking at your report cards. Some kids, the teacher will be saying over and over and over, would be great if they just applied themselves a little harder, or often stares out the window, seems to kind of daydream a lot. Um, those are some of those things are little triggers, or telltale signs, right? So there's a lot of places that information can come from, and getting a diagnosis then can help you find the right direction to go, right? And then finding a coach perhaps who can help you put some of those structural things in place, help you improve those executive functions that are difficult for you, um, in a very supportive way, right? Because we're really, 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 really hard on ourselves. That's one of the things that I think most people I have come across talk about, is that they're just really hard on themselves, because they see other people doing things that they, you know, expect they should be able to do as well.
So I really
Yeah.
like that advice there. I mean, getting a diagnosis as soon as you might think
Hmm.
you might need it, and then
Yep.
looking at getting a coach to try and implement something that works for you. I think that's really good advice, because yeah, it might be wrong to give like a blanket statement as to like what people should do. So
Yeah.
yeah,
We
agreed.
have we have a saying in the ADHD community: if you met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD, because everybody's different, and it really comes down to understanding yourself
Yeah,
as a
and the
person with
individual's need.
ADHD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'll put that link for that test in the show notes then, if anyone's
Hmm.
listening and is intrigued. Tell me about failure number 2 then, not asking for help early or often enough.
Okay. So this, we'll all get tired of hearing about ADHD any moment now, but it actually relates back to ADHD. It's not special to me by any means. A lot of people have difficulty asking for help, because it in our minds it's showing weakness. It's saying, I don't know. And we think we're supposed to know, right? We have high expectations of ourselves, and everybody has expectations of ourselves, right? But that it's like, no, if I don't get an A on my test, then there's something wrong with me, right? Or yeah, it's like, some people go, I'm happy with a B. I think that was really great. You're like,
Mm,
I passed. It's like, okay, I can't imagine what that would be like. So yeah, very high expectations. Um, and feeling like we're supposed to have that answer. So it gets it it's a place of vulnerability to ask for help.
mm,
Um, and and it's like it's unwarranted, because
mm,
nobody has all the answers, right? Nobody can. And you think, as I ask a lot of questions, right? Like, I ask a lot of questions of, on streams or whatnot. I'm often thinking about, other people when I'm asking those questions. It's like I might know the answer to that, but I might ask a question that helps somebody else get that answer. But for me to ask for help is hard to put it in, to put it out there. Um, I was thinking about, why is that? The system I used to build websites in was a great content management system, but they were very clear about, you should know HTML, CSS, PHP,
Mm.
because, and then you could do all these fancy things. And it really helps if you know JavaScript too. And it's like, well, I'm kind of okay with HTML and CSS. The rest of it, I don't know. I can figure out enough PHP to understand what's going on, but I can't tell you how to write it. I don't know any of that stuff. I've got
Mm.
books, can't work my way through the books. And so it was very clearly also laid out that don't ask a question in the help forum if you don't know what you're talking about. Like it's like there are lots of dumb questions, right? We always say there's no dumb questions. It's like, no, in this forum, it's like there are lots of dumb questions. And if you haven't, and if you also don't lay out exactly what you've done and why you're still having a problem with this, then it's impossible for us to answer and give you an answer if we don't know what you've already tried to figure out. So what it did was it pushed me to, it made me feel like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I can't ask a question. But also it pushed me in a good way to try to figure out the answer to things before I just popped in and started asking stupid questions, because they were questions that would have come from a level of, from a lack of basic knowledge that they were expecting you had. So it, it was good in that it pushed me to try to figure things out, and it still does. Like I still, try to figure out as much as I can on my own. I think I'd learn better if I do that than if I just ask a, off the top of my head question without really digging through, you know, what the answer might be. Um, but also in, and in trying to figure out what is my question, I often find the answer. Um, but it's still hard to get out there and ask for help,
Mm.
partly because then I get into my little anxious thing about, well, what if that answer isn't right, or what if, um, uh, uh, it was the wrong question. It's like a whole bunch of things that are just like, what, just ask for help. Maybe it's, you know maybe it's not such a big deal, but things
Yeah.
kind of become a big deal.
Yeah, it's really funny when you have this kind of internal questioning of your own questions, and you're like, oh no, I'm just not going to ask. Like, you know what? The effort of asking someone and potentially looking like an idiot,
Hmm.
that stress is far worse than just keeping it to myself. But it's having the boldness to ask for help that, is gonna get you an answer sometimes. But also, like you say, in reverse, if you're asking an expert a question who might just say, well, look, go find out the answer yourself,
Hmm.
that may also help. So at
Yeah.
what point were you like, I've just got to ask more questions? When was the turning point for you where you were just like, you know what, I actually just need to ask people more questions because I've tried to figure this out and I can't, and I'm just going to do it, and I'm potentially going to look like an idiot, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Oh, I still struggle with it, but right now I posted something in a Slack channel yesterday asking, how would I do this? And I got one helpful thing and one kind of, well, I knew that. It's like, well, make a Lottie file. It's like, I know that. I don't, I'm just trying to figure out, I got a whole lot of things I got to figure out in order to do that. And this is an unusual case. I was kind of hoping for a little more help. But anyway, um, I, I'm still struggling with it. I will
Mm,
still spend a long time trying to figure something out, um, before I will ask, and then I will either kind of go, maybe there's a different way of doing this, because it's easy to get caught up in an idea like, okay, this is the direction that this has to go, and then you kind of find out that that was probably the harder thing. Maybe there is a simpler way of doing it.
mm.
yeah, it's still hard. I can't say that it's easy, but I have to, keep remembering that people like to help. I think that's maybe part of it too. Is like people like to be helpful. I like to be helpful. I like it if somebody asks me and I can offer, some advice or I'll go trolling sometimes through a Slack channel. Kind of, it's like, who's got a problem? Is there a problem I can solve? Because I don't feel like I can solve most people's problems when it comes to Webflow or technical things. But it's like, if there is something I can solve, I like to be able to at least offer that.
Yeah.
Um,
And I definitely think the Webflow community is generally far more supportive, especially in Twitter. I'm not sure if you've been on the Facebook one too much, but I find that
mhm.
one's, yeah, like you don't want to ask a dumb question in there, I found. But
Yeah, I definitely find that the Webflow community has helped make it easier.
mm,
I mean, I'm not, I'm probably not pushing myself technically to the point where I need to ask a lot of questions yet, but maybe, and my technical skills are probably better than I think they are, uh, which will lead us to that third question.
mm,
But um, I, but I don't feel like I can't ask the questions. I have to find the right people and I have to feel, like I've got a
safe.
good question to ask.
Yeah. So explore all the options, to try and work out the
Yeah.
answer. And if you can't do that, then you've got a very valid reason to ask,
Yeah.
community, hey, here's what I've tried. Here's, the result, which is
Mhm.
not what I want. How do I get that result?
Yeah.
Um, I think that's really
Yeah.
good advice.
I think the other thing too is developing relationships with people beforehand. Like certainly working in with No Code North, right? I've got Maggie and Jeremy now, and I've got, the No Code North people that, you know, I can ask. I feel a lot less intimidated asking because I have those interactions with them all the time.
Mm,
And whereas if it's, you're just kind of coming out of the blue asking in general some question, that can sort of hold you back from putting yourself out there. So, just develop those relationships. And I see that happening, right? I see that happening in the community when you see people starting to create connections. And that, they're having conversations all the time offline, helping each other answer problems and supporting each other and whatnot. And I think that is one of the very special parts about this community is so find the people who you really connect with and build that relationship.
mhm. And that brings us nicely on to failure number 3. Tell me
Mhm.
about failure number 3 then. Not finding out soon enough what your work is worth and finding clients who will pay for it.
Okay, well, there's another one I still struggle with. Remember when I said I'm not sure that I've actually dealt with all of these failures yet? Yeah, so I've gone through phases where it's like I've read, the books and done the courses on value pricing and this and that and the other, and I still underprice. But I hadn't realized quite how far I underprice, um, particularly with, in Webflow. But because I live in an area that's a couple of hours outside of a major city. There's just a couple of small cities nearby, but they're not big. And it was an area that wasn't doing really well economically when we moved here. It's doing much better now. It's sort of become an area people really want to come to from a tourism point of view. And so the area is growing, and especially during the pandemic, people started moving out of the city and finding this really beautiful area where we are. And so there hasn't so there's sort of always been this mentality that, well, stuff that's expensive, right? And so I would, price things based on my understanding of what that work was worth from, wherever I was getting that information from. And that, it's like I find that people in the US can price things much higher than they can here. Maybe that's because there's more competition for, for the clients, right? So they're trying to get a leg up, or they're more willing to invest in their businesses. I'm not sure exactly what it is that makes it easier it seems to charge what things are worth in the US. But here in Canada, it doesn't seem as easy. And again, that may be the clients that I'm finding. So when you don't have a big pool of clients to choose from, you start to take whatever comes. And a lot of the clients that I've worked with have been very small businesses. And so, when you say that, "Well, it's going to cost this much," and they're like, they can't even imagine, right? So you try and do some education. And I also recognize that I tend to overbuild, right? Because I love more so than making boxes line up. I love figuring out what is, um, how do we take this information and how do we lay it out? And I tend to maybe make things more complex than they should be, which puts a lot of work on my plate, does some really neat things, but the client has no clue, right? It They just see a website. They don't know what went on to put all of that together. And so you start to question, well, am I expensive? When somebody says, "Oh, you're expensive," right? And they're the person that you were, that there was a fellow I had who was bringing business to me, who was referring business to me, and he eventually said, "You're expensive," and it's like, I I think it was he's working with the wrong kind of clients for me, and I just don't have anybody else to bring me clients. Um, but that's hard when you hear that from somebody who's supposedly helping you, find more work. That so you start to underprice things again.
Mm.
Yeah. So this week, I've tried in the past. That group that I mentioned I was part of before. At one point, I asked my mentor within that group what she would have charged for this particular website that had like all sorts of stuff. Right? She got stuck on one thing that was missing. It was a fairly important thing, but it wasn't that important for this client. And and I just wanted to know from a technical point of view, all the things that I had put into this site, what might that be worth? And I never got an answer because she got stuck on this thing. So I'm always a little afraid of asking what somebody thinks, even out in that world, because maybe it's not what I think it is. Maybe it's not worth any more than what I've been charging. So this week I was bold enough in a private call with a few people to ask, showed them a site I'd built, and they basically at the end of it sort of said the number I chose or that I had billed the client, their numbers were 2 to 4 times higher than what I had charged. And I thought I'd done pretty well with that. I knew I put a lot of work into it, more than I should have, but um, it was it was kind of like, oh, but now I have to find that kind of client because I like doing that kind of work. But how
Mm.
do I find that client, right? I'm not a fancy designer, so I don't have that visual to excite somebody about, right? Clients don't get excited about databases and conditional logic and things like that, right? And ooh, we can do this cool thing, right? That's so I haven't quite figured out yet how to find those right clients and sell to them. And
Mm.
and and that's, you know, that is still a struggle. But at least now I know that I can do work at a level that others kind of go, oh, nice. Yeah.
And have you thought about potentially working for an agency as a kind of permalancer? Because I think a lot of people who are in the Webflow freelance space, they're like, how do I get more clients? How do I get more
Hmm.
clients? Or how can I get higher paying clients? But I think sometimes the problem is actually just consistency of paid work.
Yeah.
And once you have that consistency of paid work, you have consistent things for your portfolio, you have consistent things to put on social media, you have
Mhm.
consistent build in public, I'm working on
Yeah.
this, I'm working on this, and that can be kind of like an engine for you to actually get your own clients. So I'm just intrigued to
Hmm.
ask you now, have you ever thought, well, instead of trying to get my own clients, maybe I could service someone else's clients?
It's been crossing my mind, and I think the thing that I've been struggling with is that I I haven't felt like my Webflow skills are quite there, right? Even though, yeah, I can do lots of things. I feel there are still things that I'm not as skilled at, and I'm a little afraid. I hate failing, so I'm a little afraid to put myself into a situation where that lack of skill in certain things. And yes, I get stupid because I'm quite capable of learning and figuring things out, right? And asking questions, because I do have people now that I can ask, how do I do this thing? And I see people asking all the time, how do I do this thing? It's like, well, why would that be so hard for me to do? So yes, it's been crossing my mind, and I've been wanting to just get a little bit more skilled. So I've been working my way through, because I had all that background and I spent all those years building websites. I just kind of launched into building with Webflow, and I didn't have to go through that whole learning curve of, what's a box model, and what are margin and padding, and how do I work with them, right? So there are sort of whole elements of Webflow that I kind of skipped over and haven't had to deal with much, like animations and things like that. So I'm just kind of trying to up my skills so that, and that's probably not a great reason not to reach out to somebody.
Well, I'm just intrigued. I mean, I've looked at the websites that you've done, and I can tell you now there are definitely agencies that are looking to hire freelancers and have hired freelancers with less skill set than you. So I'm just intrigued as to kind of the thought process behind why you haven't. And but yeah, I'm more than happy to put you in contact with agencies after the call if you want to.
Okay.
If you wanted to. But
so you remember what I said about ADHD earlier and low self-esteem, right? It all kind of, all of these things tie together, that the fear of failure, it can be a motivator to make you push forward. It can also sometimes be something that holds you way back from putting yourself out there. So and the low self-esteem makes it hard to kind of push yourself and put yourself forward, because you just can't imagine that you would be of value to somebody. And I hate having to say all of those things, but I also hope that that somebody else listening to this hears something in what I'm saying that they connect to, and then go and whether they have ADHD or not, because not everybody does, but recognizes that that's just human.
Yeah, I think everyone has has times when they're feeling low in self-worth, and imposter syndrome is rife, and because they've just been on Twitter and seen some crazy 3D animated website using like yeah. So
Yep.
I get where you're coming from, but I think you have more than enough skill set, and if you are interested in that, yeah, I can put you in contact with people that I know are looking for freelancers. But
Right.
I kind of
Jack
forgot.
Redley, therapist. New title
Sorry.
for you.
This has turned into a therapy session when it really was meant to kind of just be interviewing you. But I dug into that just because I feel that people that I've spoken to, they often are far more ready and capable than they realize. And it just takes someone outside of their head just to say, no, you can do this. You really can. Like, and I think whether that's to do with ADHD or just that person's personality, whether they have ADHD or not, I just think part of the point of this podcast is to kind of say, yeah, there is imposter syndrome. Yeah, freelancing is harder than just learning the difference between pixels and rems, and just the nuts and bolts of Webflow. But you can do it. You can do it. So yeah. Anyway, sorry, that kind of turned into a kind
That's
of
okay.
motivational speech when it wasn't meant to be at all.
No, that's okay. Despite all my failures, I'm still here in business 17 years later. So that's maybe just stubbornness. I'm not sure, but
It's something crazy like, isn't it something like 50% of businesses fail in the first year?
It may be the first 5 years. There's a lot that fail in the first year. First 5, getting past your first 5 years is, yeah, I
Hey,
think I just
look at
have
you.
learned to live on very little, and so
No, give yourself some credit, Penny. I've seen your websites. They're great. You can do anything you choose. You can work for any agency you choose. Now, I have a harder question to finish this
okay,
interview on.
all right.
What is your next failure going to be?
Well, I can tell you what I hope it's not. Um, One of the pitfalls of working on the web is that we spend an awful lot of time sitting, and I have not invested in a sit-stand desk before, and I haven't yet. But what I have been discovering is that as I get a little older, because um, I am starting to have physical manifestations of all of that sitting. So I'm trying to get out and walk more. We do have a sort of an exercise routine that we do in the mornings, but it's still not enough to, really get out. And so I'm pushing myself to get out and walk more. And I've just invested in a treadmill, and it's coming any day now. And I also invested in this little unit that can sit on top of the treadmill arms and allow me to work uh, when I'm walking at a slow pace, so that at least I'm moving more than I am. So I'm hoping that that's not going to be a failure because it's a good sized investment. Um, I don't know. I'm not sure because it's failure is always just around the corner. It's a little hard to say. I'm hoping it's not going to be university. I started university last year at the age of 63, and I'm on my 10-year plan towards a degree. So I'm hoping
Wow.
it's not that. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know. It might be getting to my chiropractic appointment this afternoon. That could be my next failure. I don't know.
Let's hope it's not that. I mean, that wouldn't be the worst thing to happen, though. Like,
No.
hypothetically, if that was your next failure,
Yeah,
that
no.
sounds all right.
I'm getting better at getting there on time. I am.
Let's hope your chiropractor's listening.
I'll have to tell them about this. Yeah.
But no, it's been an absolute honor interviewing you. I feel like this is an important episode. We haven't spoken about ADHD or any spectrum related difficulties with being a Webflow freelancer, and so it's a really, really important thing to talk about. So thank you for sharing so vulnerably. I know this has been, it's probably been quite hard to talk about. So thank you.
Well, I'm happy if anybody wants to have a chat about it. I'm happy to talk.
Awesome. And where should they do that if they were going to reach out to you, Penny?
My non-Webflow website is buildmarketing.ca. But the easiest way to reach me is on Twitter, at Penny Olo. That's probably where I tend to be. And I'm on LinkedIn as well under Penny Olorenshaw. So I'll give you those links and you can put in.
Awesome. I'll put those in the footer then. Penny, thank you so much for coming on Webflail, and I look forward to sharing this interview on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. This is going to be out in 2 weeks' time, so I'll let you know when it's done.
All right, just in time for everybody to sit down and get depressed over Christmas. Yay!
Thanks so much, Penny.
Thank you, Jack. It's been a pleasure.